Morning, Rotary.
Yes.
Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Phil Tobin.
Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. Our invocation this morning, Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussions. Allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of community and Rotary. Fill us with your grace, O Lord, as we make decisions that may affect us and those all around us. And continue to remind us all that what we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service of the community. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And to lead us in the pledge and four-way test, Jim Aher.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, the four-way test. We shouldn't need this, but have it. Of the things we think, say, and do, and it's been around since 1936. Number one. Number two. Will it be three? Number four.
Thank you, Jim. And we have a couple of guests today. With us is Suzanne Morgan.
Yay.
With Rotary number 1, the Rotary Club of Chicago. And her guest, Barney Kempter, who's retired Army.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And our president, Terry Bortnick.
Good morning, Rotarians. Every week when we do this, I tell myself I'm going to go home and I'm going to write that 3 times, because if you write something a few times, then you'll remember it. And by the time I get to the door on the way out, I forget to do that. So maybe I need to write a note before I leave to write a note. So today, after the meeting today, we are having a brief board meeting strictly regarding the bylaws. We just felt it was time to do a review of those bylaws and make sure we have everything in order. And I assume we'll make another presentation then to the club of those bylaws. They haven't been reviewed for quite some time. So any board members who can stay, please do. I promise we'll make it brief. Okay. We are taking donations still through the month of July, and I'm sure it'll be through August also for the emergency buckets for the Hudson City schools. As we said previously, we need 250 of those buckets. So anybody who can donate 1 or 2 of those buckets, and it's a citywide project also, it's not just us. So that's something we'd like to get finished by the end of August if possible. I think we've talked enough about them, about the safety items that it contains, and just we hope we never have to use them, but we'd like to have them if we do. Okay, today we had a cancellation of our speaker. Oh, briefly, Pat wants to talk a little bit about the beer garden also. Got to get the important stuff in.
What better to talk about on a 90-degree day than a beer garden?
So we still have some empty slots for those of you that may not have committed your time slot. We're looking for everybody to do at least one, preferably two sessions. We are still in need of large coolers. So not, larger kind of coolers that we need. So if anybody has access to any of those, let me know so that we can secure those. Otherwise, thanks to Father Joe, we have our second pop-up and we're ready to go for facility wise. Our goal this year is to serve 1,100 brats. So last year we served about 900. So we're looking up that by about another 200. And if you were there last year, you know that we had 200 people in line that walked away. So that it shouldn't be a stretch. All we need to do is look for, pray for good weather. So Father Joe, you're in charge. So we should be in great shape. Sign up sheets coming around for Saturday. Saturday is on top because that is the day we right now need the most help is on Saturday. So any questions, see me after the meeting.
Thank you, Pat. Dave Basil is not here, correct? Am I looking? Oh, morning, Dave. Sorry. Would you like to come up and present our speaker, please? I was looking for you in the other room and I didn't see you.
And we're going to the Guardians game today, so I even wore a bright red shirt. Yes, as President Terry mentioned, we did have a late cancellation of the speaker today, but one of our club members is stepping into the breach. Dr. Mimi Becker will address us today. Dr. Becker received her Bachelor of Arts from Carleton College, her master's from Duke University, School of Management, the University Nicholas School of Environmental and Natural Resources and Environmental Economics and Policy, and her PhD from Duke with a focus on international environmental and natural resources, sustainability sciences, policy, and management. She has been on the faculty at Hiram College. She was a graduate student and teaching assistant at Duke during her graduate studies. And she has been a professor at the University of New Hampshire. While at New Hampshire, she designed and taught or co-taught undergraduate and graduate courses in sustainability, community, natural resources, and environmental policy sciences and planning, integrated coastal and watershed science policy and management, ecosystem-based governance, international environmental law, and collaboration strategies. She has received the Laurel Lake Association Off-Campus Outreach Service Award, the U.S. EPA Region 1 Lifetime Achievement Award, the Town of Exeter, New Hampshire Citizen of the Year Award, and the University of New Hampshire's International Engagement Award. So clearly, as we all know, she is very accomplished, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mimi Becker, who will bring us up to date on some of the local sustainability and climate efforts of our local climate committee. Dr. Becker.
It's not a good idea to fall down the stairs on your way to the podium. So I will basically this morning try to give us a picture of, where we are and the way we're either thinking or not thinking about how Hudson ought to behave as a community and how we as individuals can take advantage of opportunities to address and perhaps prevent some of the worst case outcomes in relation to our changing climate. And also with respect to long-term sustainability of a very fine city. So I'm going to do this in two parts. I'm going to do an update on what's going on in town or what's not going on in town with respect to some of the objectives that are important. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole issue of how we are or could be managing the huge financial risks associated with the changes that are underway at a much more rapid pace than we had anticipated. So I'm going to, since I found out about that I was going to do this like yesterday afternoon early when I got back and looked at my email, I will apologize in advance for somewhat weird and boring slides. But I hope they'll be a little bit helpful with respect to the discussion. So I'm going to just indicate when a slide should change because this thing, I don't know what it's supposed to be doing, but it's not. So we're going to talk first about the journey that Hudson has been on since, with respect to the city staff, they've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. But as a community, we began with the League of Women Voters initiated public workshops in 2019, consulting the community about the nature of the change and changes that we felt were underway that were directly affecting us and the region that we live in. And one of the things that came out of that 5 years of work was the conclusion that we didn't have all the appropriate data that the city and its residents needed to make good decisions about how we should adapt to our rapidly evolving future. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have been somewhat cognizant of what's going on nationally with respect to climate this summer? Anybody have concerns? What, just shout them out, Tom. Yes. Well, we were having a little discussion about that earlier. The way to think about climate change is it's kind of the average of the weather over time. And that's why we need the data for what the average over time has been for our region over the last 20 to 100 years. We have that data partially, but because we're not monitoring for some of the necessary indicators, we're not doing any really systematic monitoring of how our natural systems are behaving with respect to life support, you know, oxygen. What are they doing with all the carbon we're putting out? So there are things that we don't know that we should know. Okay, who else had an issue? Yes. Yeah. That's a very good question. And if you happen to live in Singapore, you'd ask the same question about the forest in Indonesia. Part of it has to do with the managed forest, which we have tended to treat as monocultures because they produce certain species that are more desired than others. But the other is actually the result of unanticipated long-term drought. And the melting of the permafrost in the far north, which is releasing huge quantities of methane, which is highly flammable. And once you get lightning strikes in those environments and you've got a lot of debris on the forest floor that accumulates over time, you're going to have big forest fires. Tom? Yes. Well, yeah, that is true. But if we're talking about human help with all this, a lot of the monoculture forests have had some of those issues. We had in 1997 a huge ice storm that affected all of northern New England and all of the eastern provinces in Canada, from Ontario to the sea. And that caused huge damage in the forest with downed limbs and downed trees. And the forest floor is still littered with that event, plus whatever subsequently has happened. So it's for anybody that's used to thinking about how we manage our uses of forest resources where that's a reality, and those forests which are still wild, they both took the same hits. And so the long-term consequences, we are just compounded between nature and us. And we are still in denial about a lot of the us parts. So those are two, sort of big deals. And then we are having storms that are unusually early and hard, partly because of an El Nino year, but also for other reasons. So if you want to go to that next slide, I'll give you a little bit about the story as it's evolving right now. In June, there were a series of recommendations that were submitted through the Climate Crisis and Environmental Sustainability Work Group, which is comprised of Hudson citizens and members of the League of Women Voters. There were some recommendations brought to City Council about why a greenhouse gas inventory was needed for the city, and what we were asking the City Council to do about it. And these baseline inventories cover emissions from all sources within a community or a region. This includes residential, government initiated responsibilities and real estate, vehicular emissions, the cost of carbon emissions, cost of managing waste, treating water and wastewater, producing energy or moving it around in the case of Hudson. And so all of the relevant sources of greenhouse gas emissions, the most common ones we have to deal with in Hudson are carbon dioxide and methane. And there are currently about 30 uncapped abandoned oil and gas wells in the city that are 24/7 emitting methane and hydrocarbon CO2 emissions, as well as aromatic hydrocarbons into the air. Those wells are technically regulatory responsibility of the Department of Natural Resources. But the Division of Oil and Gas gets its revenues from how many permits are out there. So they have little inclination to be severe on the enforcement, especially the capping of wells. And it's dangerous to not cap them because some of them eventually leak, some of them catch fire, some, they're not good things to have in an urban environment or unattended in any environment. So that's a somewhat unusual thing. Not all municipalities have to deal with that. And part of that was inherited as a result of the merger, but there are wells that are actually in the old city boundaries. So the inventory would include all of those sources. And we are currently, depending on where we live across the country, there are some places that are exceeding the 600 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And there are some places that, because of their location, are below the 420, which is the average daily concentration of CO2. And we're increasing that by about 2.5 parts per million every year. Some years more, depending on the weather circumstances. So this is all carbon based. So I'm not talking, the methane arises from wetlands and swamps that are disturbed, melting permafrost, hydrocarbons, and in the oceans from underwater volcanic activity and so forth. So the methane is actually worse as far as its effect in the atmosphere, but there's less of it and it's less amenable to human intervention. So this was what we asked the city council to address. The city staff had been very busy providing a lot of information about the good things that Hudson has done. But the members of council, most of whom had not attended any of the workshops, so they didn't have a foundation, made it very clear that they didn't understand the facts that were presented. And so as a result, they decided that they would take it up at a month later at their council meeting and workshop. So there was formal commentary presented to them earlier this month about the details of where Hudson stands. And the president of city council presented the New York Times study that just looked at the footprint, residential footprint of cities all across the US. And Hudson comes out as a pretty high emitter of residential emissions. But the purpose of that study was not a greenhouse gas inventory. It was to just look at the likely role of residential emissions in communities. And because we're wealthy, we have large dwellings by and large, and large footprints on the land from our residential community, we came out in that study high. But that is not a greenhouse gas inventory, and apparently council had confused the two. So what they did was to say, okay, we're going to appoint a 3-person subcommittee to look into this. Now, it's taken those people who don't work a lot on climate change, and I've been doing this for more than almost 30 years on climate stuff in one place or another on the planet. So I know how long it takes to really figure out how all the moving pieces fit, and we still don't know. So they were supposed to report back at some point in time. That time has not yet arrived, and to my knowledge, the committee hasn't met. It takes some time to do a greenhouse gas inventory. You want to go to the next slide, please? Okay. So there was a consultant, a series of consultants that were reviewed by City Council, by the Environmental Advisory Committee, and by members of the working group. The most experienced and highly respected consultants are the local governments for sustainability, and they are fondly referred to for some reason as ICLEI, which is an interesting name, but they've been around for over 30 years, and they work internationally. They've done more than 2,500 cities. Right now, they're doing all of NOACA. And they finally have this thing down to a systematic science of being able to access the data that they need. And because of that, they, in recent years, have developed a proprietary software program that lets them compile the data. And they said, look, we need to get this done. Let's make it affordable. So their standard across the board rate for doing this, instead of being over $20,000 or more, is $5,000. And in order to get that rate, you have to be a member of ICLEI, which costs $1,200 a year. So Hudson could get this, have their staff do this for a little $6,200, which is not going to break Hudson's bank. And the communities that have used ICLEI have access to their staff. They will Zoom attend meetings, or in some cases come in person, but they have not had pushback on quality or the validity of the data that they've collected from the communities they've served. And we've had one member of the working group whose job it was to vet them inside out, and he's pretty relentless about it. So what the working group did was make a recommendation that they contact ICLEI and vet them to help the city compile the data. It obviously means access to city staff to get them to help with the effort, and the city staff has been kind of ready and waiting for this for a while. So this was the formal recommendation that was made. And the working group has been closely working with the Environmental Action Committee to try to get this underway. So, and this is my other hat. If the comment back to the recommendations was, well, we haven't heard from the citizens. I didn't know I'd given up my citizenship in Hudson, nor did the other members who've been contributing to this, but they want to hear from the citizens. Enough said. Okay, next slide. And a formal letter followed those presentations and the lack of action, which was sent to every member of City Council and personally presented to the president to the mayor. So they all have the formal recommendations, but we are waiting to see what they hear from the citizens and what the working group has discovered, and we're providing them with whatever information they need that we have. Okay. So that's where we are in a holding pattern. And meanwhile, we're due for some very serious rain. And we've seen what happens when the roads gets washed out, which they have been happening various places. The National Park is dealing with some of that. So here, that's where we are in Hudson at present. So we can't really make intelligent decisions about what we should do unless we know where the pressure points are, where there are issues that we have the opportunity to deal with, where we could take advantage of the available federal funding, and both individually as tax rebates, as we make personal decisions to invest in more efficient renewable energy. And we also know that we're facing the shutdown by the state of Illinois of the source of slightly over 50% of our electricity. We have no existing plan moving forward to do that other than and city staff has committed that whenever a long-term contract renewal opportunity arises, we will be moving more into the renewable energy sector than we are right now. But that 2062 contract with Prairie State is still in place. And that's an issue that the city really needs to deal with in order to give us the opportunity to gradually move to sustainable sources, which at this time are many times less expensive than any of the fossils. And nuclear is the most expensive of all. We don't have a nuclear plant source in the state that is operating efficiently and is very costly. So we have lots of opportunity to manage that transition and to save lots of money. Next slide. Okay, so this is what we need to do, what we can do. We need to continue educating city council so they have the information that will answer their questions. If you think that city council should move faster, you can let them know. If you want to explore the evidence that evolved at the city council meeting on June 20th, which is what the initiative that they're currently avoiding. Those are the places in the recording of that meeting where the issues were discussed. And then there is a workshop that has now been scheduled for September the 6th at the High School Media Center, where we'll be having the relevant people provide hard data updates, but also where we will be asking citizens what they want to know now and what priorities they think the city should be fostering, so that there will be a significant portion of that will be devoted to exchange of information and discussion. And if people have recommendations that they want considered, we'll get them out there. So next slide, please. So the whole issue about Hudson's sustainability as a healthy community, and I mean, when I talk about sustainability, I mean economic, environmental, and social, because human communities don't survive in a healthy form over time if those three components are not addressed and integrated toward the future. So we have access to lots of renewables and lots of incentives to gradually, stepwise, as individuals approach this. The city has opportunities as an institution to adapt some of these. And when Joe Ortiz comes back, Dr. Ortiz from Kent State, he has been with the Environmental Advisory Committee exploring the technologies that are proven, accessible, and which save tons of money. So the solar, wind, and hydro are now delivered all more can be done more cheaply than any of our fossil sources. The other technology which is being used pretty widely, particularly by institutions and business corporations, but in some areas by residences, and that is geothermal. What we do is we go down to far enough down to the groundwater that we can pull up a circulating system that simply circulates the groundwater to the surface, and it goes back down and regains its 55 degrees temperature. Well, why would you want to bring 55-degree temperature groundwater to the surface? Anybody? It is warmer. The only thing you have to do in terms of adding heat that might be electrically generated or generated with fossils is to make up the difference between 55 degrees and whatever you are comfortable with, or whatever is the minimum needed to make people safe. And so it's the initial investment can be, if you're doing it for a large area, can be significant. Western Reserve has done a lot of development in recent years to bring geothermal energy to its campus in town. If you have not been educated about that, it might be an interesting presentation or discussion here. But one outstanding example that's not that far away is Miami University. And about, I don't know, 14 years ago, 13 years ago, they transitioned to campus-wide geothermal heating and cooling. Now that was a big investment to start with, but over the time since they did it, they've actually reduced their spending by $95 million. Do the math. That's not trivial change. And in the process of saving that much money, that includes the payback. So it's above and beyond the investment and the operational expenses compared to what it would cost them if they were still on the old system. So they've reduced their campus-wide energy consumption by 39%. At the same time, they built more buildings and increased their footprints by 25%. And they reduced water consumption by 43% and their carbon footprint per square foot by 57%. Yes, that's a significantly large educational institution, but it's something that's worth considering as we try to attract new business, as we deal with our city campus. So there may be residential areas, some of the residential communities, homeowners associations may want to go for that, because there are incentives in the Infrastructure Act for sort of district sustainable energy initiatives. So that's an example. And there are lots of other ones at different scales, but that was one I thought, you know, that's a big chunk of change, and it's significant savings and a journey toward efficiency. Never mind it being a model for the students who are being educated in that environment. So, okay, next slide. So how do we think about assessing the risks and convincing ourselves that we really need to take some action? How do we think about that? Well, pretty much it was ignored for a long time by the major financial institutions. But as a result of what's been evolving over the past few years in particular, with the severity and the ongoing consequences of damage from huge climate events that have hit large areas. Think of the Western wildfires. Think of the Western drought. Think of the Western floods. It's now coming to the Southeast and the Northeast, and Ohio has been relatively unchanged. That's not going to continue. And we have predictions from the Northeast Climate Action Plan, which is a US government initiative, that we are going to be getting ever more of these seriously severe, 3 inches of rain in a half an hour events. A lot of us aren't equipped to manage that kind of water. And it causes a lot more pollution. There are things we can do about that. We're not doing them very religiously in Hudson right now, but there are things we can do to manage the consequences of these events. We are sadly over the threshold. What we can do now is adapt in how we manage our response to limit the damage. And if we do seriously enough things globally, we can slow it down, but we can't stop it. Pandora's out of the box, and that's a reality, and doesn't matter where you go on the face of the earth. We have met the enemy, and she is largely us, because this is on top of naturally occurring processes that have gone on for millions of years. However, these kinds of institutions are now acting. Some of them have declared that they will no longer insure real estate in Florida or businesses in Florida for very good reason, because of the failure to initiate adaptive responses there. That's just a bad financial decision, and they've had enough of it. I read a couple of figures that were on the last few years, up to $22 billion a year in damages from severe events. Now, those are severe weather events, but the accumulation over time of that kind of demand on emergency response funds, on emergency response humans, on the need for temporary housing, and then what? So these kinds of events are becoming ever more common. And so what they've done is to begin a process of risk assessment that allows them to deal with anywhere from a 30-year to a 70-year time horizon, and then adapt their risk management policies according to the scenario that fits the area. And so they're doing now formal forecasts for cities, metropolitan areas, vulnerable industry, through the development of data-based climate risk scenarios. Do we need the data that we don't have? Yes. If they're going to be able to make intelligent decisions about what your home insurance is going to be, whether they're going to give you liability insurance or not, whether they're going to continue to insure certain types of activities. Home builders are going to start getting nailed with lack of insurance for the process of building because of the kinds of damages that they've been having to pay out for structures under construction. So next slide. Next slide, please. There. Yeah. Okay. So they've come up with some variables, and one of them to do these scenarios. And this is, I took this out of from Moody's information because they're pretty widely respected source of data and predictions used by the financial industry. So they talk about, okay, what are your risk variables? And they have a whole series of global and regional temperature pathways in terms of the temperature swings, how fast your average temperature has been increasing over the last 20 or 30 or 100 years. Its effect on public health and productivity. We're getting diseases that haven't been seen in Ohio for more than 100 years. Malaria. There are a whole series of tick-borne diseases, vector-borne diseases that are tropical. We will be the same climate. I think, okay. We will be the same climate as South Carolina. That's where we're heading. That's what all the predictions say. We don't have to worry about sea level rise, but the people on Lake Erie have to worry about where the water level is in relation to how it affects our coastal area. I thought it was interesting that they were mixing energy demand and tourism. But it turns out that in many regions, tourism is a main income driver and a main driver of energy demand, whether it's for transportation or to run the tourist traps and housing for tourists, people on the move. So those are what they consider to be their climate risks variables, and they're a range of variables specifics under each of those categories. And then the transitional variables are the price of carbon, the emissions pathways, where are the emissions occurring, from what sources, where are there sinks for them, and how are they affecting the environment into which these emissions are occurring, both locally and regionally. We are in the midst of a super regional impact arena with the fallout from the Canadian fires. We are also in an area that suffers greatly from accumulations of ground level ozone because of all the transportation corridors and unfettered producers of coal-fired electricity. So that's part of what nails Hudson area people with respiratory issues. Commodity and energy prices have a critical number of variables that they need to track along with the energy mix. What's the proportion of your energy that comes from renewables that doesn't emit what we are concerned with? Well, we have up to 40, almost 40, well, maybe 38% of our energy that can be tracked back to hydroelectric power, some solar, and some wind driven that's in the portfolio that the city now carries. The biggest proportion of what's renewable for Hudson is hydro. And that may change as the amount of water in the waterways changes. It's a little chart, and we have a fair amount of wind energy. So there is energy to be had. It is the fact that when we enter into a contract, it's usually long-term in order to get lock in the best price. And so that's why we're a little stuck with Prairie State. But those transitional variables, it's how do we get from the current economy base with respect to energy to one that is sustainable over time, that's not going to cause harm for life on the planet. So next slide. And so this is kind of how they tracked it. It's a really bad image, but that was what I could do at the time I had. So what we're trying to do is to reduce the temperature, and that means we have to reduce the pathways that CO2 gets into the environment so we can address the transition initiatives, and they can figure out what risks are associated with that they have to insure for or manage for. And these are the physical risks. So once that data is available, then they can come up with scenarios for communities to say, okay, here's one way we could reduce our carbon footprints. Here's another way. Here's the difference in cost. Here's the likely near-term and long-term consequences. Tom? This is Moody's model. This is new, yeah. Yes. Okay, actually I can stop right now. Yeah, but that's kind of where we wanted to go, was to get an idea of how and Moody's, I took Moody's because they have let their current, this is new stuff for them. I was shocked when I saw it because I have been ignoring them. Yeah. Okay. So questions? Just push it.
Are there any other communities in our area that have done the study that you're talking about for Hudson doing?
Yes. Actually, all of the Nowaka counties, which is Cuyahoga, Lake, Geauga, Lorraine, they're all in the process of doing this. Some are farther along than others, but it's a coordinated effort, and ICLEI is doing the inventory. And they all have sustainability plans that they're working to implement. And the sustainability doesn't all depend on the greenhouse gas inventory, but they're doing it. Overland did this more than 20 years ago. Kent, the city of Kent and Kent State have recently started on this journey. So there are lots of communities in Ohio, Dayton, Cincinnati, Miami. Next. Any more questions?
So
Hi, I have one question concerning your Miami University. You mentioned a reduction in water consumption. I don't see how a geothermal system, either closed loop or open loop, would reduce water consumption. Can you explain how that came about?
Well, I'm assuming that as they reconfigured their delivery systems, that they stopped wasting a lot of water. I think that was probably a side effect of the geothermal. I don't think it was because of that open or closed loop technology. I think it's because it came along with the campus strategy to become more sustainable.
Or did they change to waterless urinals?
I personally cannot tell you that. I can tell you that when we redid my building at the University of New Hampshire, we had this is a science building, 4 different water systems. We collected the roof water, which they pumped up from a reservoir under our teaching amphitheater outdoor, and colored it blue for reasons I've never quite figured out. And that's what went into the urinals and the toilets. So they may have, as part of the system, found a way to reuse the roof water.
I just had a question that as a certified energy manager for the Army, that I don't see how just changing to geothermal changes the water consumption. It's been my experience for 25 years that it doesn't.
I don't think that was a conclusion other than they're changing to the geothermal for their heat source. Involved an entire campus-wide sustainability planning initiative that meant we conserve as many resources as we can, however we can. If they put water conserving showers in place, they put low flush whatevers, whether it's a urinal or a toilet or whatever, in place, I can see where that water consumption would go down. It's part of a mindset to become more sustainable.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mimi. Good info, something we all need to be concerned about. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Where's my- Oh. You had me looking for it there, Ben. Yeah, that's okay. I didn't see there. Oh, thank you. Okay, our payout today is $10. The jackpot is $299. Yeah.
Okay, it says 923758.
758. Okay, it's Ralph. Here, I'll bring it down there.
Don't forget your marbles.
Oh, wait a minute, let me get the marbles. Don't want to lose the. Here, I'll come to you. Okay, ready? Oh, you were ever so close, but no cigar. There you go. Thanks, Ralph. Okay. Today, just in case you didn't know, is National All or Nothing Day. So get out there and give it your all or don't do nothing.